Hello, my name is Michelle Bumatay, and I'm an assistant professor of French in the Department of Modern Languages and Linguistics at Florida State University. Before starting my presentation, I would like to introduce the panel to which it belongs, entitled Bande dessinée as and Memory, Archive, History. This panel expands on Mark McKinney's contribution to postcolonial realms of memory, sites and symbols in modern France, in which he analyzes Emmanuel Rouzet's bande dessinée adaptation of Didier Danex's novel Cannibal about the 1931 Paris Colonial Exposition. Central to Rouzet's adaptation is what McKinney calls postcolonial gazing, or a critical engagement on the part of readers with their own, quote, implication in historical colonial violence and its effects on the present, end quote. My presentation and Honorine Rouillet's presentation, like McKinney's entry, consider bande dessinée a dynamic site of postcolonial memory. We hope that you will watch both presentations, and we look forward to your questions and a lively discussion in October. My contribution is entitled Petite Histoire des Colonies Françaises, Little Comics Speak Volumes. The majority of Petite Histoire des Colonies Françaises is narrated by this irregular circle sporting a kepi and a military uniform, a recognizable, if rather abstracted caricature of Charles de Gaulle, who directly addresses readers while walking them through French colonial history. At the end of the third volume, this irregular circle is joined by another similar figure dressed in black, who turns out to be François Mitterrand, and who takes over the narration. Comprised of 5 volumes, released from 2006 to 2012, Petite Histoire des Colonies Françaises was written by Grégory Jarry and illustrated by Otote, the pen name of Thomas Dupuis. It mostly follows the chronological path from 1016 to the contemporary moment. Visually, the series is eye-catching and suggests a facile comprehension. Each installment is color-coded, using only 2 hues of a single color, and the vast majority of the pages feature voiceover narration above a 2-strip vignette, most often without speech balloons. However, the series' ostensible lightheartedness is, in fact, the result of several interrelated strategies meant to attract readers and maintain their attention. A closer look at the primary narrator reveals the series' ingenious balance between cartoonish entertainment, biting satire, and a critique of how French history has previously been framed. Here on the left, we see the opening of the series, that, when flipped through rapidly, animates the de Gaulle narrator walking towards readers while addressing them. Otote's cartoonish form for de Gaulle and setting of the French countryside immediately create a pleasant and non-threatening environment. Additionally, de Gaulle's first lines work to generate community and project positivity. Mesdames et messieurs, mes chers compatriotes, la France occupe aujourd'hui un rang de première catégorie parmi les nations du monde, car elle a su, par le passé, prendre part à la plus belle des entreprises humaines, la colonisation. Et je suis ici, parmi vous, ce soir, pour vous raconter la fabuleuse histoire des colonies françaises. While the choice of address posits French citizens as the target audience and echoes presidential speeches in general, the ici and parmi vous ce soir makes readers feel like they are collectively embarking on this guided tour. If the dripping sarcasm is lost on readers, a few pages later, the narrator first explains that he was chosen since he holds France, its values, and mission in high regard. Then, after a pause of 2 steps, he adds that he was also chosen since he knows that the readers will listen to him, just as they did during the somber moments of Les Trente Glorieuses. The comedic timing of this page helps transform the real de Gaulle's paternalism into an endearing parody while critiquing it. On the next page, the authors meta-discursively point to themselves to reinforce readers' engagement. Et puis, ne soyez pas naïfs. Vous savez bien que je ne suis pas réellement le général de Gaulle, car je suis mort le 9 novembre 1970 à Colombey-les-Deux-Églises. En réalité, je suis l'image du général de Gaulle, reconstituée à partir des archives de l'époque. This last line is funny because of the drastic difference in Charles de Gaulle's actual likeness and the irregular circle with stick arms meant to represent him. However, the authors do not specify which archives. Readers are meant to conjure up iconic photographs of the leader of the French resistance and architect of the Fifth Republic. But there is another archive to which the authors allude that makes this statement closer to fact rather than humoristic exaggeration. Specifically, caricatures of de Gaulle from the 1960s, especially from the May 68 Atelier Populaire posters and from the satirical magazine Harakiri. We can even read the reference to de Gaulle's death here as a specific allusion to the last issue of Harakiri in 1970. The cover, featuring only the phrase Balle tragique à Colombey, un mort, purposefully downplayed the significance of de Gaulle's death in light of the fact that nearly 150 people had also recently been killed in a fire at a club. Raymond Marcellin, interior minister at the time, banned the sale of the issue for offending the dignity of de Gaulle, which immediately prompted the editors to end Harakiri and establish Charlie Hebdo, a title, at least in part, that refers directly to the deceased president. Thus, des archives in this case could mean the institutions of Harakiri and Charlie Hebdo, which then creates a subtext that right from the start situates the history of resistance and critique as always already a part of the history of France's colonies. This example demonstrates how the authors generate humor by playing with readers' assumptions while delivering multiple layers of meaning. In fact, Grégory Jarry and Autoté no doubt had these institutions in mind when they co-founded Éditions Fleubelob in 2002. According to their site, Fleubelob refers to the noise when you stick out your tongue, an apropos choice that reflects their adoption of satire and derision as guiding principles. From the publication of the first volume, this series has garnered much attention. At the 2007 Angoulême Festival, the first volume won the Prix Tournesol, a prize established by the Green Party that celebrates the bande dessinée that best addresses ecological problems or that excels in promoting the values of social justice, the protection of minorities, and civic rights. Then, at the 2011 Angoulême Festival, in conjunction with the publication of the fourth volume, the authors curated an exhibition about the series that parodied the 1931 Paris Exposition with 4 pavilions, one for each existing volume. The whimsical exhibition played with scale and even provided ironic photo opportunities for attendees. You could get your photo with de Gaulle, and you could pose as either Jacques Foccart, architect of La France-Afrique, or Omar Bongo, first president of Gabon, as they strike an oil deal. For the flyer, the authors both imitate the exoticization at work in imperial iconography and critique the contemporary political view that France should only focus on the benefits of colonialism. Practically at the same time as the Angoulême exhibition, the series attracted a different kind of attention. The fourth volume, subtitled La France-Afrique, includes an inserted sticker explaining that on the eve of when the book was to be printed, several individuals broke into the printing press to destroy a section of text. Readers are instructed to alter their copy of the bande dessinée by adhering the destroyed text, a simplified description of resource extraction in a neo-colonial context. Just above the reproduced text, the authors explain that Lyon authorities are in search of the culprits and ask anyone with information to come forward. They also pose the following question: Qui a commandité un tel acte de censure? What does this insert reveal? First, speaking directly to readers and including the authorities' request for assistance, the authors demonstrate the importance of creating a sense of community, but also responsibility among readers. Second, it reveals the power of the series' subversive nature, telling multiple stories at once. Considering the timing of this act in relation to the series' content reveals the French state's deep-seated and active repression of colonial history as constitutive of contemporary France. The secretive ploy to censor part of this particular volume is telling, since it centers on the hidden machinations during and since decolonization on the part of the French government and French businesses. Indeed, a ghostly caricature of Jacques Foccart on the back cover, standing in line with an African leader, is representative of his looming presence and lingering influence in France's former colonies. His white attire and dark sunglasses are visual tropes that Autoté similarly uses throughout the volume. The connotations of backroom deals and cover-ups fits perfectly with the printing sabotage, which ironically validates the story being told about how French presidents appointed unelected officials to construct a framework by which the strategic and economic benefits of colonialism would not be severed, and that such scheming should be kept from the public's knowledge. So what is it about this series that could be so threatening that a rather straightforward description of neo-colonial exploitation would cause such a bold action? In her preface to the collected edition of Petite Histoire des Colonies Françaises, released in 2014, French scholar and specialist of African history, Catherine Kokkary-Vitrovich, explains that the series is a far cry from a textbook, yet teaches many lessons. Moreover, she alerts readers to the power of the series in her title, Un outil de combat pour penser librement. Though this is an apt description of the series, the authors make every effort to render this outil de combat ostensibly non-threatening to readers, such that they seriously consider the stories told and critiques made. This underlying principle is most evident in the deliberate decisions about format and organization. Each volume is a softback, half-size, horizontal book made up of text, stick figures, and a featured color. This playful format contributes to the series' charm, banking on people's interest in miniatures to help facilitate the critiques being made. In his book on miniatures, journalist Simon Garfield explains that, quote, "We bring things down to size to understand and appreciate them, which encourages greater scrutiny and deeper participation, and helps us imagine grander schemes," end quote. Furthermore, Garfield highlights our pleasure in looking at miniatures since they generate a sense of control and mastery. The authors of Petite Histoire des Colonies Françaises leverage this phenomena by blending the small size of the bande dessinée with the series' overall organization and simplified visual style. The series' diminutive title, Petite Histoire des Colonies Françaises, suggests the promise of mastery while operating as a kind of bait and switch. It lures readers into believing that the series will focus on the distant past, when in actuality, the majority centers on the recent past and the contemporary moment. Additionally, the volume's subtitles suggest easy categorization. Of the 5 volumes, the first 2, L'Amérique Française and L'Empire, are explicitly dedicated to exploration and colonial expansion. The third volume, La Décolonisation, sits at the heart of the series and begins with World War I. The 2 subsequent volumes, La France-Afrique and Les Immigrés, due to their inclusion and the space they occupy, posit these topics as equally important as exploration and empire. They also disrupt neat notions of periodization. Ultimately, the organization of the series, 3/5 of which deal with the 20th and 21st centuries, works to center colonial history as the history of modern France. In addition to the shape and organization of the series, Autote's aesthetic choices work to maintain readers' interest while drawing attention to history as fabrication. It is worth pointing out that Autote has a keen interest in flipbooks and has made several about animals that presents a single story from 2 different points of view. He similarly deploys this whimsical take on how subjectivity informs our perception of reality in Petite Histoire des Colonies Françaises. Here, for example, the authors present 2 versions of French colonial negotiations in Algeria. The visual discrepancies parody the tendency to present oneself in a positive light when recounting events, while the co-presence of these 2 versions foregrounds how historiography is a form of power that shapes public opinion. Favoring imperfect geometric shapes devoid of facial details other than hair, Autote generates a visual style that, like the series itself, appears simplistic but is dense with meaning. He quickly conveys context, most often through cultural tropes such as clothing, and he promotes reader identification through abstraction. This is particularly important since Autote's stylized stick figures democratize representation, which subverts imperial notions of racial and cultural superiority and inferiority. Thus, though the narration remains laden with paternalism, euphemism, and platitudes, Autote's vignettes that do not always mirror what is being recounted expose the underside of such state-led discourse. So what stories does this series tell? Focusing on France in the New World and empire building in the 19th century, the first 2 volumes present famous explorers and colonizers while downplaying yet still demonstrating the crucial roles played by land usurpation and the subjugation of indigenous peoples and African slaves in a parody of what Michel Roth-Thoyer has identified as formulas of erasure and banalization. Of course, key historical events from the past play a large role, such as the Berlin Conference, World Wars I and II, and the 1931 Paris Exposition. But the authors also posit current events, such as President Nicolas Sarkozy's infamous 2007 Dakar address, as equally constitutive of French colonial history. Throughout, there is one key component that permeates the entire series: violence. The physical violence embedded in the institutions of colonialism and slavery that official versions of history have either erased or neutralized through recourse to various ideological justifications is repeatedly on display at every turn. However, special attention is granted to torture, in particular its use during and since the Algerian War. In his own words, Grégory Jarry attributes the impetus for the series to the desire to know more about his uncle's time in the French army during the war. In fact, the scene in the upper right-hand corner in which an elderly family member recounts war stories to a child mobilizes this personal anecdote as part of national consciousness. Below, the de Gaulle narrator opens an aside about torture that seeks to normalize it through banalization. However, since such discourse works to absolve the state of wrongdoing and responsibility, parodying it exposes it as yet another form of state violence. That much of the third volume, subtitled La Décolonisation, is dedicated to Algeria, demonstrates how the invention of decolonization, to use Todd Shepard's formulation, is the bedrock of the Fifth Republic. Towards the end of this volume, the de Gaulle narrator poses three interrelated questions. Comment allaient réagir les Français depuis le temps qu'on leur disait que l'Empire, c'était la grandeur de la France? Comment décoloniser tout en gardant notre dignité? Comment conserver nos intérêts économiques, géostratégiques et le petit frisson qui accompagne la domination des peuples sous-développés? While the fourth volume presents France's response to these questions, the fifth excavates how differing political parties frame the current issue of immigration in France. Together, they tell us the story of the transcolonial present. Petite Histoire des colonies françaises in many ways resembles late 18th century English models of slave ships that, for Simon Garfield, served as, quote, bold visual literacy for the masses and encouraged viewers to look very closely at a subject previously ignored or unexamined in detail, end quote. In addition to the 2014 complete version, the authors released a box set just last year in 2020 that includes a bonus pamphlet with Kokieri-Vitrovich's earlier preface, essays by the authors, and a short vignette with President Macron as the narrator. The vignette, originally published a year earlier in Le Monde Diplomatique, introduces an energetic Macron who, while pedaling on a scooter, officially recognizes carefully selected past atrocities committed by the French state. The vignette can be read as a parody of what Giorgos Nousis calls Macron's crisis of acceptance, a strategy that, like Sarkozy's anti-repentance, attributes past events to others, thus positing them as having no impact on the present. The release of this box set and the author's inclusion of this ultra-contemporary vignette testifies to the ongoing, quote, urgency of asserting the central place of the colonial in the making of modern France, end quote, while highlighting satirical bande dessinée as an outil de combat pour penser librement. Thank you.